All right. I was freaking out a moment just there because I didn't realize I had YouTube open in another browser. And so that intro music was playing twice. And I was freaking out thinking, where on earth is this coming from? But I've resolved it and it's sorted. So here we are. Welcome to VUX World Live. I am your host, as always, Kane Sims. And this is the podcast where we bring you the greatest minds in voice AI, conversational AI. We pick their brains about how they do what they do so that you can do what you do better. I'm delighted to present Deepgram as the sponsor for this episode of VUX World. Deepgram is an advanced automatic speech recognition company, provides APIs to help you do things like automatic transcripts of meetings, videos, all that kind of stuff, podcasts, as well as ASR technology to help you create voice bots and voice assistants and all that kind of stuff. Companies all over the world are using Deepgram. It's got incredible accuracy, over 90% in some cases, and it's cost effective as well. And so if you are in the market for some speech recognition technology, or you're just generally interested and want to take a look at the market and see what's available, reach out to Deepgram, because I'm sure as well, if you're actively searching, they'll do a comparison with other providers, and they will actually show you how it performs for your use case, for your industry, for your needs, in comparison to the rest. So do check out deepgram.com/VUX World if you are interested for more information. That's deepgram.com/VUX World. And speaking of VUX World, this is VUX World, and today we've got an epic show lined up for you. We're going to be talking about the future of voice in the car. Now, the car is one of those places where voice user interfaces and voice assistants are an absolute perfect solution, because people's hands are occupied, their eyes are occupied. And so we're seeing all kinds of trends in the car around independent voice assistants, around some of the kind of voice platforms like Alexa and Google Assistant, all vying for a space and a place in the car. And there was a partnership announced a couple of weeks back between Harman and Cerence to bring what I think is the future of voice in the car. And so I thought, why not bring along Harman and Cerence to share their story about what this is all about, what it enables, what trends they're seeing in the industry, in the marketplace as well, and what they think about the future of voice in the car, and their advice for brands and people who want to build experiences for in the car as well. So I'm delighted to welcome to the show, we have Albert Jordan of Harman. Albert, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And we have Joe Iacobelli from Cerence. Joe, welcome.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Glad to be here, and thanks for reaching out and having us on the show here.
No worries. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Shout out to Oliveira, who says, hi, everyone, tuning in on YouTube. Hello, Oliveira. So we'll do some intros. I'd love to learn more about your respective roles at Harman and Cerence, and I think there'll be some people on the show who are familiar with both companies, some more than others. So we'll do a bit of an intro as well around, as well as your roles, a little bit about Harman, a little bit about Cerence. And so, Albert, you are the Vice President and General Manager of Automotive Applications at Harman. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your role and what it is that you do at Harman, and also what Harman Automotive does? Harman International.
Sure. Harman traditionally has been a tier one, right? So we receive bids for producing head units, and then all the professional services that go with it. About 3-4 years ago, we made the conscious decision that a lot of the capabilities were going to depend on cloud. So Harman came up with a strategy to provide a product. It's called Ignite Cloud, that tries to abstract the car and provide those capabilities back at the cloud layer, so that you can more easily introduce services and manage the car. Now, when we did that, the obvious area that we saw that we need to focus on was third-party applications, because just like the car, just like any industry where people are searching for killer apps and killer applications, no one company can do that by themselves. And you're better off open up the platform and allow just a seamless introduction of third-party application services. So we made the conscious decision that we want to focus on that, and provide a mechanism to bring third-party applications to the car. And then so the product I have is, it's called the Ignite Store, and it's focused on bringing third-party, Android-based applications to the car.
Interesting. And so when you say people searching for the killer app, of course, there's the killer app, but there's also a myriad of other apps and other things that people can do, which is, I suppose, it's a case of actually, would you view it a little bit like almost like an operating system for the car in its own right that allows third-party services to have a presence and provide value to users on there? Is that how you would describe it?
No, I wouldn't describe it as an operating system. So the operating system that we're all, are going to support is Android Automotive, right?
Mhm.
We think that that's the platform, that's the OS that is going to have a major impact in the automotive industry. So that's the target. We want to remain CDD compliant. We don't want to fragment Android in any way. So we're on a layer on top of Android Automotive.
Right, that makes sense. Fair enough. So and your role is, you're running the whole entire product, the development, the go to market, the whole sort of scope of it. Is that right?
Correct.
Cool, nice. And Joe, what about yourself then? So you are the director of sales, engineering, products, and strategy at Cerence. It sounds like you have a lot of stuff to do over there. What does your role entail? And for those who might not be familiar with Cerence, I mean, our audience that tend to be fairly kind of sophisticated AI enthusiasts, but for those that might not know about Cerence, maybe we'll do a little bit about Cerence and also what your role is over there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm responsible for the North American sales engineering team. So we work with tier ones like the Harman team and work with the OEMs. So our main responsibility with my team is to ensure we have voice assistants for the OEMs, but mostly working with the OEM car manufacturers, focusing on North America. So my team looks at this whole solution architecture behind it, how to technically make what the OEMs are looking for in the market. And I also work with our internal product teams and our technology officer team here, and seeing what strategies we can go for future, right? So we look for not only what the OEMs or what the market is doing need today, but also looking our short-term roadmap, looking at our long-term roadmap, and 3-5 year plan also going forward. So our team in North America focuses on that, and I'm responsible for that with the team here in North America. So Cerence as a company, basically we're a global front runner for AI-powered assistants, right? So we look at voice recognition technologies, ASR, natural language understanding, TTS. We both have embedded and cloud connectivity and connected services and content. A little bit familiar with Cerence. It's kind of it actually is a split off from Nuance. We were part of the Nuance Corporation, a publicly traded company. And about 2 years ago, actually 2 years, and October 1st was our 2-year anniversary, we split off and had one public company, Nuance, split into 2 public companies. And Nuance focuses on the enterprise market and focuses on healthcare, and had another division that focused on automotive, and was beneficial for us to do the split, whereas we can focus specifically on automotive. So Cerence is a spin-off or split from Nuance. So we went from one public company to 2 public companies there. Just a little bit about what we've been doing. For the last year, every second car, or 1 in every 2 cars sold, has Cerence technology in it.
Wow.
So we're pretty much working with virtually every major manufacturer or OEM in the market, from traditional legacy ones like Mercedes, BMW, Ford, GM, Volkswagen family of Audi, and then 2 of my personal favorites, Maserati and Ferrari. And also working with some new EV players like NIO and Xpeng. And that's been our main focus from a technology side. And we're basically expanding also into taking the same AI-powered assistance, and because we focus on the mobility side, so whether you're mobile in a vehicle, we've actually seen that you can expand that and go into a 2-wheeler market, and working with the American motorcycles and elevators. Just to give you an idea of how we came about from that side, there our heritage for over the last 12 to 15 years is we've been providing voice assistance in the mobility space. We worked with all the major handset manufacturers, smart TVs. If anyone's familiar with speaking to a Comcast remote control, that's been us. And for some of the older people out there like myself who know what a PS2 is, we did a lot of the gaming consoles with Lifeline or US Navy SEALs or Seamen, where we voice activated the actual phones themselves. So over the last 15 years or so, we've been having over 16 billion voice utterances. And our technologies are not only on one voice for North America, but pretty much over 70 voices and 70 voices and 70 languages is what we actually work on right now. So that's kind of powerful. So Cerence as a company, yes, has been around for 2 years, but for the last 12 to 15, we've been focusing on the voice assistant space there. So it's a natural evolution to go on automotive and then expand into the other markets from two-wheelers and elevators and all that fun stuff there.
Interesting. Well, I think definitely we're seeing definite trends around people using voice interfaces outside of the home and getting a lot more comfortable with them. I think the pandemic's helped that as well, where people have been at home, been using their smart speakers a lot, been using their voice assistants on their phone quite a lot. I've actually noticed myself using Siri on my iMac even more lately. I don't know what it is really, because historically it's been a terrible experience, but for some reason I find myself using it more and more. So I think there's definite confidence growing with people's kind of confidence in using voice interfaces, and obviously Cerence with immense experience and history in providing those kind of capabilities. I had a question for you, Albert, which is around the partnership between Harman and Cerence and why Cerence became the kind of the partner that you ended up going with when you're searching for that. But I think that question might have already been answered by Joe around the depth of experience that the team has. But maybe we'll start with maybe explaining just what this partnership is. So Albert, maybe you can give us a bit of a building on the story you were saying around Harman trying to provide kind of like an open playing field for third-party applications and services to make their way into the automotive kind of space. What was the kind of next step from there? Was it always intended for these things to be voice enabled? Like, where did the whole kind of requirement for a voice partner in that environment come from?
Right. So, like, if you look at like the in-car experiences, right? The everybody's in agreement that having some people call it the voice first, voice optimized, but voice is the primary interaction mechanism for in-vehicle use cases, right? So that's just a given. And then the kind of like the dilemma that was there in the market is that you don't want to burden the third-party app developer with solving that problem, right? So the app developers need to come in and just provide their capabilities in the cloud, their services. I call it the experience roaming, that you have this mobile experience, but then when you come to the car, you want to continue that experience, but that the experience has to be in concert with like what you can do in the car, right? So voice becomes a very important mechanism for that interaction. And so what we wanted to do was to just create a platform where third parties can come in, they could contribute, and they don't have to think about the voice piece, and that would be the heavy lifting that Cerence and voice providers address, right? And we just provide the plumbing, right? We just want to keep this very simple things work, right? So that was the kind of like the impetus for this partnership.
Interesting. And what would be an example of the kind of applications that are available in the Harman Ignite store? Are we talking like radio stations? Are we talking navigation? Music providers? What are some examples of the kind of applications that you're seeing and that you think you'll see in future?
So media is first and foremost, right? That's the kind of like the one that there are plenty of Android automotive applications today, and a lot of people that are coming on board. Then when you go beyond the media, there's like parking, charging, POI, navigation, productivity, e-commerce. All of these things are are the kind of like the key domains for automotive, and the user experience is going to be the determining factor whether these will succeed or not succeed. So the voice is the critical element in all of these things.
Interesting. And so, from your perspective, Joe, it sounds. I mean, I understand, Albert, that it's that from a kind of like from a brand's perspective or an enterprise perspective, being able to just make your services available in the car to be accessed by end users while they're driving, etc., without the heavy lifting of the voice design and the technology and all that kind of stuff makes total perfect sense. From your side, though, Joe, presumably that causes a couple of problems, does it? Because you've got lots of different apps, lots of different services, lots of different kind of utterances and types of experiences. What role? So Harman, it sounds, is providing the foundation, the plumbing, the kind of infrastructure in the vehicle. What is it that Cerence brings to the table in this environment?
Okay, so what we bring to the table, if you look at from, I'll follow up on Albert's comment on the actual plumbing itself. So what we actually do is all the ASR, voice recognition, and the natural language understanding behind understanding what a user says, like a simple utterance, which would play, hey, play the Stones on Spotify. We need to understand what the user said, what his intention is, and then execute an actual command. So our products themselves is based on what we've been doing for the last 15 years. I'd mentioned is ASR recognition, natural language understanding, and most importantly, task execution. Because in the end, if you really talk about a comment, if somebody says, "Hey, what's the weather?" Besides the actually of ensuring that one, the application is installed. Second, making sure the user is logged in. Third, actually making sure that the application is launched and running. Then you can only get to the point of understanding what the user said. But we were talking about all technologies, and if you think about it, the customer is still waiting for, well, I just want to know what's happening in New York City. Let me know what the weather is. So that really is the, each to our piece with respect to the application, and then understanding what the user said. But then it's actually working with the Ignite Store and the application to get the content. Because in the end, really what we're looking at is the task execution. Because the Ignite platform, along with the voice assistant, the conversational AI assistant we have, the number one priority is to get the content and to actually answer the user's question. It's a task completion. So the technology behind it is to actually go out and answer the question, like what's the weather, or play a media, right? That is really the partnership, and the technologies of the Ignite Store and the Cerence Assistant working together gets that done. So if you say really what we do from a technology side, that's the underground layers. It's typical ASR, NLU. But really what the partnership does and what we do together, like no one else can, is making sure that the content and the question that the user asks for, or the task that he asks for, is actually answered, because that's really what the person wants.
Interesting. So is this then a obviously you've got companies like Mercedes that are building their own independent voice assistants, and we had Mihai Antonescu, who was the product owner for the Mercedes voice assistant in the US. I think they actually worked with Nuance before it was Cerence, or perhaps now Cerence, for some of their speech technologies.
We built MBUX for Mercedes.
Exactly, yeah. And so you're seeing Mercedes launching its own assistant. You're seeing also BMW launching its own assistant. And so you've got car manufacturers that are launching their own assistants. You've then got other car manufacturers who are kind of like incorporating Google Assistant and Amazon Alexa, things like that. This capability, this partnership, Albert, is this a Harman assistant, or is it a Cerence assistant? What is it that people will interact with on the front end, like wake words and all that kind of stuff? How is it kind of presented to the user?
Well, it's definitely not the Harman assistant. We're not providing an assistant, right? I would say that it's really differs from OEM by OEM. Right, there are OEMs that are gonna take what like Cerence might have out of the box and provide that assistance, and there are OEMs that believe that they can have some value add and then bring an extra layer on top of what Cerence provides, right? And we're just agnostic. We just want to make sure that we have the right plumbing in place, and then There's this whole concept of templates, right, that the OEMs control to make sure that they are okay with distracted driving concerns. And then our job is just to make sure, for example, those templates are voice enabled. We test them. We ensure that that third party application seamlessly integrates with that assistant.
Right. So it may be that an OEM will utilize this technology, stick it into an infotainment system, and that might end up being basically the Nissan assistant, for want of a better word. Is that
Right.
what we're saying?
Right.
Interesting. That makes sense. Okay, then. So how then would a brand kind of provide their services in this environment? So, let's say that I am, I don't know, Heart Radio or XYZ News Corporation. I know how to build a skill for Alexa, how to build an action for Google Assistant. What do I do to get my services available and voice enabled in the Harman Ignite Store? How do I go about doing that?
Right. So, what we, again, just going back from an Android automotive perspective, right? We're adhere to that framework, right? There's a application model that the framework supports, right? So, for example, for media, right? If you are a media provider, you have to, enable, certain interfaces, and with the parking, charging, you have to adhere to these protocols that are defined by Android Automotive, right, and Android Auto. So we just make sure that from a template perspective, those templates are voice enabled. So when you say find restaurants, and then there's a template that has a list view that shows the list items and a map that goes with it and shows those list items on a map, that for example, not only the person can utilize touch to get to the answers that they want, but then they also can just utilize voice to navigate and get to their answers.
And Joe, does this mean that you would kind of like that this comes with kind of out of the box Cerence capabilities, but the OEMs would essentially need to modify certain parts of it? For example, the wake word, for argument's sake. Is this an out of the box, ready to go solution from a voice perspective, or is there further kind of iterations or development that needs to happen further down the line regarding wake words and stuff like that?
So I'll answer your question in two parts. From a release perspective, what we're talking about here is out of the box with respect to the domains that Albert had mentioned before, with respect to media, navigation, weather, all those type of applications there. So that's part of our standard product offering out of the box. And the reason why that is we have basically been focused on that for the last several years. So our natural language understanding NLU technology can support many weather utterances or utterances within a media, play, stop, play X number of either play the Stones on Spotify or I want to hear some music. So that's all part of our NLU that we already understand out of the box today. Also, with respect to wake-up words, we work already with the OEMs on either having a custom wake-up word or a branded wake-up word themselves. So the user can have a personalized wake-up word or a custom branded wake-up word for the OEM, like Hey Jeep or Hey Mercedes. Again, we work with the OEMs on that. Really, to add on what Albert had said with respect to the Android integration on different applications, definitely if they follow the Android standard with respect to exposing their APIs with the Android intents, we can actually go out and integrate with it. We also offer tools. You mentioned before about Alexa skills and company. We also have our Cerence Studio tools. So if the app developer wants to go and has a very specific niche app or an app that goes and capture the long tail, they can also go in and create their own NLU similar to a skill itself. And then we add that to the NLU, all in cloud, all live, and then your not only is your app voice activated, but it's also part of the arbitrated result that's in the OEM's vehicle itself. So it's both. It's out of the box, which we think we cover 95% of all the use cases and applications that are out there, the major ones from what we've seen. But then we also provide the tool that if the app developer wants to go out and use our tools to voice enable their application, then we can also offer that to arbitrate within the larger NLU we have.
Interesting. So an app developer would essentially then create an application within the Cerence platform. Is that so? Does that mean that that application will be available across all Cerence domains, across all Cerence implementations, or would they need to specify that they want this particular use case to be available via the Harman Ignite Store?
It would be both, but I would see it more as the following use case. It'd be an application an app developer who wants to sit on the Ignite Store. And for example, if it's in the domain coverage as navigation, media, they pretty much don't have any work to do, right? So they come on the App Store itself. We already support those domains. And as Albert mentioned before, you respect the Android intent, you expose the APIs, and you are voice enabled. That is really the key. But if you get to a point where there's a very niche application that somebody has a specific, and I like to use garbage collection. Some people have some really cool apps that they want to say, hey, what's the garbage collection days in my region or my area? It's kind of very specific. Again, can sit on the Ignite App Store. We can call it, we can use it, but to really voice enable some specific SKUs or specific streets or some specifics about the app, we do offer the app developer for these niche type of applications to go in and create his own NLU and then be added to the across all Cerence Cloud applications that are called in conjunction with the Ignite App Store itself. So that's the way it would actually work from an app developer side. And really, I like to call it the long tail of apps or the niche apps themselves, that we don't have within our NLU. Now, the advantage to the app developer compared to some of the other technologies is you don't have to have like a double word, right? You don't have to say, hey, Google, ask Alexa to do following, or hey, Jeep, ask Alexa or Google to do X. You just speak at the top level, right? You can say something like in the vehicle, oh, I need to take out the garbage. When's the collection? Is it Monday or Wednesday, right? And then at the top level at the NLU, that is go and launch through the application to get the content and get the response back, as I mentioned before.
Interesting. So this gets into the question around kind of priority and availability, essentially. So Albert, you mentioned at the beginning there that the idea is to give essentially all third-party brands availability, equal kind of access, opportunity to provide their services in the vehicle. And we've had this discussion plenty of times on the podcast around discoverability and stuff like that. But at least when you're driving, it becomes, I think, more important to get things right because you don't have the user's attention all the time. It's like everyone's been to a point where you're at a roundabout and someone's sat next to you and talking to you and asking you a question, and you can't answer the question because you need to concentrate on the roundabout. There's certain parts and certain times where when you're driving, you do really need to concentrate, and therefore all your attention is kind of taken away driving. And so the importance of getting something accurate is really high. So in that way, then, I'd be interested in getting both your perspectives on this. How do you create a environment where everyone has equal opportunity? If, for example, you don't have to specify a source for that media. So, for example, if you say take the bins out, in that example, you could maybe use the location and figure out the local, municipality from that. Other times, if you say play the radio, how do you then determine which radio station gets played? If you say something similar to that, play what's the weather, how do you determine which weather provider provides the, how do you, when we're trying to create that kind of like equal opportunity, given the limitations of the voice interface itself, plus the limitations of the user in the car, how do you determine priority around which applications get used when?
Right. So that's a very, very good question because my gut, my feeling has been that in cases the car, some car implementations have tried to be too smart in terms of really guessing, like, okay, what the user wants, and and then try to do that. And when you do that, invariably, that the problem with that is that the algorithms tend to favor a very select few content providers, right? So these innovative companies have just no chance of just like breaking through and getting there. So there's two ways that we're trying to address the problem. One is that what we believe is that there needs to be a priority given for the applications that the users have selected and downloaded, right? So
Hmm.
if uh, if I've made the conscious decision to download the Yelp, for example, well, maybe that's the application that I want to use to look for POIs, right? If I downloaded, for example, Amazon Music, maybe that's my preferred media provider, and then I go for podcasts and musics whenever somebody that says that. But that by itself is not. I don't think it's enough. And the certainly, like if you look at the mobile world, like if I'm trying to do something, there was a catchphrase once that, oh, there must be an app for that. You go and look for an app and then you download it and you're off to the running. You don't have that opportunity in the car, right? So like for my favorite example is parking, right? So if you look at parking, um, it's at least in the US, it's highly fragmented, right?
Mm.
So I live in the Bay Area, and if I go to San Francisco, it's one parking providers that's dominant, and if I drive to San Jose, it's another, right? So and it's the chances are when you're just like as a driver when you're going to these places, right? For the first time, you don't have the apps downloaded, and you don't have the luxury of like stopping the car, going and peruse the app store, for example, look for logos, and then download the right one. So you have to come up with a fairly reasonable recommendation engine that if the person is like even either proactively or recommendation was you bubble up like, okay, here's like if you're looking for parking, for example, here's like a target list of apps, and if the app is not there in the car, then download it automatically. And the kind of like with the integration that we're providing with the OEMs, like we install the app, there's like the identity management is taken care of, the payment stuff is taken care of. So all they have to do is to say that, yeah, that's the thing I want to explore, right? So
Mm.
it is a hard problem, and like one of my knee-jerk reactions is that always give third-party application providers an even chance of getting discovered and being utilized so that we can grow the ecosystem.
Mm. Makes sense. You can imagine a world where you turn up at the car park and the vehicle's GPS makes a call to the parking providers, and then whichever parking provider covers that area then responds,
Right.
and then you can recommend the app. I imagine we're miles away from that in terms of the sophistication of the provider's capabilities.
Yeah, it's not like there were GPS. I think that based on the location, we do want to, we do want to bubble up the right recommendation, and we also want to allow the app providers when they submit an app to not only to say that, look, here's the car models and make models that I want to target. Here's the countries I want to target. We want to go a little bit lower than that, right? Okay, here's the neighborhoods. Here's the cities that I cover, right? So they become a lot more discoverable
Mm.
in the process.
That makes sense. And is the determining which provider or which response to give to a given utterance, is that on the Cerence side,
Yeah,
Joe?
so the utterance itself is just the first step. I mentioned before with respect to content. I'll answer your question after what Albert was saying in two ways. It all depends in time. When it's time zero, you just get into the vehicle and you start to set up your system. That's when you have the discoverability of which applications the user actually likes, what his preferences are, what he downloaded, and then what he uses. Over time, the user starts to use the system. So if he says the first few times, play the Stones on Spotify, play the Stones on Spotify, we start to learn. So the Cerence assistant has two ways of solving it. The first way, it could be with respect to our AI technologies that learns the user's preferences. So based on what the user's done, what he asked for, we know which app and which content he wants. Okay. So if the user says play the Stones on Spotify, play the Stones on Spotify, and then the next time he says we start to learn that, and the user says play the Stones, well, we know that for the last several times he's played the Stones on Spotify. And like I'd mentioned before, the number one objective is understand what the user said, but then execute his task, get the content to him that he wants. He wants to hear the Stones. Okay. So it can either be that point there, or the other way we solve it is with dialogue. It's conversational, our assistant. Again, we get the content, we get the applications from the Ignite Store, and we know what the user is wanting at that point. It really depends on the OEM of how they want to design their assistant and what they want to offer as their brand within the actual vehicle. It can be conversational. It can be that the OEM wants to have a conversation per domain for a confirmation. So it can be like, hey, play the Stones. And the assistant can come back and say, hey, I see that your preferences are the Stones on Spotify. Would you like me to play their Montreal 1985 playlist? You say yes, and then it plays on there. The other thing, so this is the way we would solve it with respect to getting the user the content. The other integration we've done as part of the use cases with Ignite is, remember, it could be that maybe the user's not logged into the application or somehow got deleted. But we know from the fact that the user has been using a certain application. So what we've done from an integration side is be able to trigger the user and say, hey, look, you're not logged into your Spotify application, or you're not logged into your media application. Would you like us to log you in? So we can execute that task for them. Because remember, the assistant is not only there for doing ignition on the ASR side. That's, 10 years ago, we did that. The whole point of this partnership, and the whole point is giving the user the next level service, next level value of completing a task. And what I really mean by that is giving him his content. We know he has certain applications that he likes. We learn from it. We can either ambiguate or have a dialogue side, or we can entice the user and say, hey, you're not logged in. Log into your app. Would you like us to log you in? To give him what he actually wants.
Interesting. We've got some questions coming through. Leonardo, I know your question was a while back, and Mr. Bendig, we've got a couple of questions. I'm going to get to those questions in a minute, but I want to kind of like stick on this little thread that we're on for a moment, because I think it's a really interesting discussion, because you probably hadn't seen it, but there was a report published today by the UK government, and it was called the Digital Radio and Audio Review. I don't know. I'm assuming you probably didn't see it. It's a very specific UK thing. But did you see it? No?
No, I haven't. No.
You haven't seen it yet.
So essentially what it is in 2020, the UK government put together a steering group that consists of a number of media providers and radio stations, things like that, looking at the challenges that radio providers will face in future. And one of the things that comes up obviously and inevitably is voice assistants. And some of the recommendations to the UK government is they recommend regulation around voice assistants always providing free access to radio stations, and also in some cases they call it preferential carriaging, which basically just means preferential treatment when it comes to accessing content. Now, I wrote a piece on VUX World today about that, about how I think that language is a dangerous way of describing things. If you bring in regulation that prioritizes certain industries over others, you're in danger then of stifling innovation, and which industry do you decide to prioritize, which providers in that industry do you decide to prioritize, and it becomes a bit of a mess. It stops being open, it starts being very closed, and then there's all kinds of things going on with incentive structures and stuff like that I think don't really make too much sense. However, they bring up a couple of good points in there, which is that some of the challenges that media providers face is that platforms like Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, those kind of assistants, they don't give you any kind of data. They don't tell you much about what people have been asking for and user behavior stats and things like that. You can put web analytics on your website. You can monitor people's behavior. You can then change and improve things based on that. But the voice assistant platforms don't give you any of that. And so the argument is that media providers are a little bit in the dark. And so what I don't agree with is what is this whole concept of preferential treatment for the radio industry. I think that's complete rubbish. What I do understand is this concept of free and fair access. And that leads us in. We've kind of been talking about how do you determine which provider to use in what situation, but it brings us on to this topic of interoperability. Now, interoperability, it sounds as though, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds as though any provider who has an application can potentially expose that application on the Harman Ignite Store, and therefore it's available, and there's no restrictions around that. What about things like somebody who uses Google Assistant and manages their calendar and their diary and all of their text messages and etc. through Google Assistant? Where do you kind of stand on this kind of interoperability between assistants, not necessarily the application level, but the assistant level? So you'll see some cars that have Alexa built in, some cars have Google Assistant built in, some cars, I think one of the BMWs, it's got the BMW Assistant, but it's also got Alexa. What are both of your thoughts on the interoperability topic around equal access to the assistant level, equal access to the wake word, equal access to different assistants?
You want me to go first, Albert?
Sure.
I can answer. Yeah, so we've actually have patents around there that I'm actually proud of. So we have a patent that's called cognitive arbitration. From our side, I'd mentioned before, we're an assistant, and what we really provide is task completion and fetching content and execution. Now, do we care if it's handled by our NLU or handled by another assistant, or whether we use media source 1 or media source 2 or media source 3? No, that's not where we play. We truly believe that the trends in the market are happening, that the user wants to bring their digital life into the vehicle. And by them doing that, what they're really looking at is being able to want their application. So they use Microsoft productivity tools. They use their shopping maybe on Amazon. They use their favorite media streaming source we talked about. They want to have their favorite podcast for VUX World that they want to connect to. And voice is becoming pivotal in order to provide those services. So what we have is an arbitration mechanism. Based on what the user said, we will trigger either a domain or an application to actually be called and to execute the task. As we mentioned before, if he wants to hear the Stones on Spotify, that's what the user said. So we will give him access to play the Stones on Spotify if that application is on the Ignite Store and we're integrated with it. The same way comes that if he wants to set a timer, hey, Alexa, set a timer, we will do that wake-up word recognition and do the handoff. This is all part of our cognitive arbitration, whereas we will arbitrate between different assistants all the way down to the different domain level and application level, and then actually do the handoff. That same thought process applies for the apps we just talked about, because a user might say, play the Stones on Apple Music, or I want to hear the Beatles on another streaming source, LiveX Live. That is what the user said. So we arbitrate at that level and then do the handoff and execute, actually give the Android intent for the application to take over and do its thing. It's also very, very important from an arbitration side. You mentioned wake-up words. Wake-up word engine also smart enough to say, if the user said, hey, Alexa, well, then he wants to talk to the Alexa assistant, and we do that actual handoff. So there's an arbitration that needs to happen in the head unit of the OEM to call the task of who the user wants to which assistant the user wants to actually execute his task or do something for him. It can be the interoperability between the Googles, the Alexas of the world, and our assistant. And then the same applies for all the content and applications on the Ignite Store. That's the way we look at it. We look at it as a complete interoperability from our side. We don't looking at the point of blocking anyone out, because the user, the trends we've been seeing is the user wants what he wants, and he wants to take his digital life in the vehicle. If he sets an alarm using Siri, you're not going to change his mind. So what you have to do is, at least what we've been seeing, is give them the option and enable the user to take his digital life and bring it in the vehicle. That's our thought process, and that's why we've built our cognitive arbitration feature or function within our assistant to handle specifically that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I think that Cerence doesn't. I mean, you don't brand Cerence as an assistant. It's almost like the white label technology that people can build assistants on top of. So I think it makes sense in
Correct.
that respect.
Correct.
I think that there is an interesting story from Sonos where they said that Google were basically blocking them for putting their own assistant onto their smart speakers in conjunction with Google Assistant. So basically, what it is that Google wanted to have access to the wake word and control that arbitration, whereas Sonos wanted to have access to the wake word and hand off to Google. Google weren't necessarily happy about that, didn't want to play second fiddle, because I think Google's incentives are that it wants to control access to the internet and be the kind of facilitator. But Albert, what are your thoughts on this concept of one vehicle, multiple assistants? Do you think that that's that kind of the way that things are heading, or do you think that ultimately, as long as people can get the music played and get directions and fulfill those tasks, then people are happy?
Yeah, I mean, it's somewhat orthogonal to like the scope of like what the App Store does in the car, right? So it's a kind of like a orthogonal to what we do. But my personal feeling is that, people use assistants for different reasons, right? And they have a preference, right? And then they may have multiple for multiple reasons. So for example, I may use Alexa because there are IoT devices at home that are connected to it, so that's why I use it. But then I use my phone assistant, for media, right? And to me, I think that the kind of like the simple approach might be that just offer the multiple assistants in the car, and it's just like having different people in the car, and then the user is talking to different people to get things done or get the answers to it, right?
Mm.
And then the only other thing that I would also mention is that, one of the issues that the industry is going to be a challenge is privacy, right? And then so to what extent do you want to put the safeguards over there, mechanisms over there that preserve privacy, and keep these things separate? I think that that's would be a good approach. That, like, okay, if I've entrusted the certain information with the Alexa, for example, then just keep it over there, right? And then don't provide a way for those personal information to just proliferate across the internet.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good time to bring in a question from Just Curious, who is just curious about this question, and he or she directs it at Joe. Sounds like you are tracking user data with AAOS. How are you addressing data security concerns? So building on what Albert was saying there around privacy and security being important, what kind of steps and approaches do you have around privacy and security around user data?
Yeah. So what we actually do, just so we don't own the data. The data is part of an OEM because our services are, like you said, we're the white label, and each of the OEMs owns the actual user data itself. So from a tracking perspective, what we have is we support all security. So first thing, when you log in and accept, there's a ULAW that the user can consciously accept the data. We also have mechanisms that the user at any time can come in and make a request to delete his data, and we can delete the data at any given time that they want. We also have the option of obfuscating and encrypting any user data that is sent to the system. So that is pretty much how we've been addressing security and data concerns. We're very, very cautious of that. Our CIO within the company, and when we're actually developing from a product side, ensure that these security mechanisms are there. Again, we don't own the data. We don't sell the data. That's not our business. Our business is to provide AI assistance, and is to do the task completion. The data we do use, which is for the benefit of the users, and again, it's obfuscated. So we have no idea what user X or who user X is. We just know that Y number of users have said that they want to buy movie tickets. So that means that we need to either voice enable applications in the movie ticket market, or we need to update our NLU for movie tickets, for example. That's how we use the data to improve the service for the user.
Makes sense. So one of the other things that came out of that review, and this is something that we've touched on as well on the podcast, around access to user data. Now, for example, if you build on any other voice assistant, essentially the agreement that an end user has with the assistant is an agreement between the user and the company. So, for example, the agreement between me and Apple is that I use Siri and Siri captures my data and uses it or whatever. Any application that wants to integrate with that essentially will behave a little bit like the Harman Ignite Store does, whereby the provider exposes their APIs and services, the voice user interface and the data is handled on the front end, and essentially all the service provider gets is a request to provide content or provide a service. And that's the way that most of these voice assistants work. But one of the struggles with that is that as a application provider, you often don't know either the context at which that request came from, or sometimes you might miss out on other opportunities to be able to provide things that people want because you don't have access to that data. For example, I imagine that let's say you mentioned movie tickets. I imagine the audience cinema would really love to know how many people are asking their vehicles about X number of movies, for argument's sake, because that means that they can then say, all right, lots of people are asking about this movie. Let's put some content together about this movie, but they need access to that data in order to get that. I understand why they don't and probably won't have access to that data because they're not data controllers or anything like that in this arrangement. But what do you, where do you sit on this kind of like data transparency situation? Is it Cerence? I'm assuming Harman doesn't have any of the data. You provide the infrastructure, and it's Cerence that has the data capture and collection. But then you mentioned the OEMs that sound like they're the data controllers, and so it kind of belongs to them. Where do you sit on the whole kind of like data sharing, either for the well, predominantly if actually to improve the system, as you've been kind of saying, like how does the data work, if at all?
Yeah, so we're not in the business of selling data. We're not in the business of sharing data in applications that you've mentioned because it's not our business model. Our business model is to provide conversational AI assistance, and our job is to complete a task. So if the user says he wants to listen to media on a certain media provider, our job is to execute and make him hear the music or make him hear that podcast. We are not there to go out and tell all the podcast providers that, hey, 1,000 people in the last 20 minutes have asked about VUX World podcast because Albert and Joe are on. Right? That is not our business model, and that is what really differentiates us from our competition. Is that the data is owned by the OEM. We are enablers of the technology, and we build a white label assistant for the OEMs. And the usage of the data on approval by the OEM is specifically to improve a domain or to improve a service. And we're very, very follow those rules very tightly with our full GDPR compliance, and we make sure that that's within our DNA of the company.
Makes sense. Albert, what do you see as being? I think we've kind of touched on some of the kind of like common, I think, applications that we're likely to see in the Harman Ignite Store. Music, likely one of them. Navigation, likely. Yeah. I'd love to see that car park payment example come to life. Where do you see? We got a question here come a while ago from Leonardo Dari, who says, "What about domotics control by voice in the car? Basically, smart home automation and being able to trigger that stuff from within the vehicle." I'm wondering if we can get your thoughts on that, as well as what you see as some of the emerging use cases for application usage and voice application usage in the car.
Yeah, so actually, people may not know this, but the Harman is wholly owned by Samsung. One of the Samsung product lines is Smart Things, and they're making a big time investment in IoT kind of like products and platforms. Samsung is like, when it comes to appliances, for example, they're the market leader in those. So we are working very closely with Samsung to come up with like an application that hopefully addresses some of these use cases. And the trick over here is really work with the market leader and come up with like some sample use cases and experiences, and then see if there's an appetite from a market perspective to adopt them. Right. There are concerns about right access. So, for example, like some OEMs might have issues with like, hey, you have to give the user control to turn on the oven, and then if the house catches fire, then okay, who's liable over there, right? So there's these there's these liability concerns that are swirling around. But you have to start someplace, right? And then so the starting point for us is like, hey, start work with the market leader like Samsung, get like a view of like these devices at home, right? And then just that's the starting point, and then we'll take it from there, right? It's going to happen, but it'll happen slowly, I think.
Yeah, makes sense. What because we mentioned commerce earlier on, kind of in we touched on it very briefly. It was mentioned. There's all kinds of examples, I suppose, that we could give. I mean, Joe, you mentioned cinema tickets. Albert, you mentioned parking. Lots of examples of where monetary exchanges can be made in the vehicle. The example I always give is. I used to be a bit of a gambling person. I tend not to gamble anymore because ever since having a child, I just don't have time to watch football. But one of my old favorite use cases was I'd love to be driving and just be able to say, put me a bet on for the weekend. But I bet you that Man United beat whoever 2-0 or whatever it might be. I'd love to be able to do that because it's just so frictionless. Or another one would be like, sometimes, a lot of purchases are emotional purchases, aren't they? And so if you're driving home and you feel like a takeaway that evening, then you could order a takeaway while you're in the car before you come to your senses later on and rationally think that that's not a good idea. But there's all kinds of examples of those kind of things. But Joe, you mentioned that 95% of use cases are already covered. I'm assuming that these transactional commerce-based use cases are in that 5%. I'm wondering if it'd be interested to get both of your perspectives on what you think the future of these kind of commerce type interactions are. Joe, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because we kind of got to be a little bit ahead of the App Store and the applications themselves because we need to make sure that the NLU supports it. So to answer the first question on smart control, home control, that's definitely one domain that we already support. So we do have that there. The other thing, Kane, you mentioned with respect to purchases and commerce, that's also something we've worked on we kicked that off about 18 months ago or so. And this is based on the study, because you asked a question of, okay, what are actually people doing in the vehicle? Really based on facts. We still have 80% of the use cases there are making a simple phone call. 60% is about asking for directions and navigation. And 50% of the daily uses is even on sending a text. Now we started to talk about the media side, right? You get 40% of the asks, and then the expansion into weather. You do have the purchases with respect to restaurants or any food purchasing, and which is about 15 to 20% of daily usage on a voice assistant is actually coming there. And believe it or not, we've been seeing a lot of cases, as you just mentioned, a shop for product or impulse buy. About 4 to 5% of the assistant data right now, or usage of the data, is on impulse buys, right? You're driving back home, whether it's, hey, I got to pick up a pizza or pick up something to eat, or I'm in trouble, send flowers, or it's Mother's Day. It's like, oops, I forgot, send some flowers on. This is all stuff you can do from the actual vehicle. Of what we're seeing going forward as additional apps or NLU coverage that we'd have today, and then innovation going forward. Maybe just one more minute on the question from Mr. Bendig with respect to contextual factors or context. That is very right. Everything we're talking about here, we've been talking primarily about voice, but we have many triggers or contexts within the vehicle. For example, the user is just on simple emotion. You hear in his voice, he's very angry, very upset, very excited, and he's like, saying, I got to drive quickly to the office, right? That is a actual use case. And then the assistant can come back and say, don't worry about it, Kane. You'll arrive at the office 5 minutes before your next meeting. Would you like me to play some mellow music for you in the background, right? That's an integration of the assistant based on contextual triggers, based on the user's emotion or what the system's hearing, along with taking content from the Ignite App Store, giving that back to the user. And that use case here is a real live use case that we support today, not futuristic. That's something that can be done today. Same thing on context on, for example, the user says, I need to find parking. And you see that it's raining outside and he has his wipers on, right? So that can be a point that, hey, we're going to find a parking lot that has basically a covered parking so the person doesn't get wet. So we have all these different contextual information from the vehicle that is inputted in conjunction with what the user said. We marry those together and execute the task or get the right content form or launch the right application for the user. Very basic. The user has an electric vehicle and he might say, I got to put gas, I got to have charging. We're not going to offer him a gas station. We're going to have to make sure that we find him a parking station or an EV station, or even conjunction. I need to park. And you see the car is low. There's only 10% left on battery. You might prioritize a gas station or an EV charging station or a parking lot, actually. Sorry, you were going to prioritize a parking lot that has a charging station in it. You bring them there, navigate them there, and then you can say, hey, would you like to charge your EV charging app for your payment perspective to buy your parking spot and then buy maybe an hour of charging, for example. This is how we actually use the context around the vehicle, along with what is happening in the user's life and in this certain context to make the right selection. So we're more on a point of prioritizing not company A or company B, but prioritizing the right product based on the application he uses for what the user needs at that actual service at that point there, based on what he asked.
That's fantastic. That's really, really good. That is the future of voice in the car, without a doubt. One very final question, quick fire question to wrap up on. If there's one thing you'd love to see as far as an application or what have you in the car, either on the Harman Ignite Store or otherwise, Albert, what's the one thing you think is missing that you'd love to see?
I think that when I look at the whole market, it's really slanted towards entertainment. And what the opportunity there is like to bring things that make drivers more productive in the car, right? Like fumbling through your emails and then selecting the right ones, and then just like making sure that you're responsive, or just like there's the Slack app that brings you up to date on all the relevant information that you need to be up on, right? So that's the place I see a great opportunity for people to come and innovate.
I agree with that. What do you think, Joe? What's the one thing you'd love to see, or what's missing?
I have two. The first one is calendar. We're in the car, you're a road warrior, you're in the vehicle, you're traveling between meetings. What's my next meeting? What time is it at? Do I have enough time to get there? Getting your calendar view spoken back to you so you can take a snapshot without picking up your phone, because it's safety number one when you're in the car. And the second one is launching a productivity. And what I mean by that is either launching a Teams meeting, creating a Teams call, getting onto a Zoom call or a WebEx from the vehicle, right? And that proactivity is like, hey, your meeting at 2:00 is with Albert. Would you like me to start Teams? Would you like me to start WebEx for you? That aspect there in the vehicle, I would love to see. Would definitely make my life a lot easier.
I agree. That would be absolutely ideal. Although WebEx doesn't really get on with me for some reason. I keep having to use my mobile to actually physically call in, so I might defeat the point. But Zoom's fine. Well, listen, Albert, Joe, this has been absolutely fantastic. I'm sure we could have gone on for another couple of hours if we were in person and we had a beer and a cigar. But I'm afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people go to find out more information, either to reach out to yourselves or to find out more about Harman Ignite, or to get started with building applications for it and things like that? What's the best way for people what's the best next steps for people after this podcast, Albert?
Just send me an email, albert.jordan@harman.com. I would love to answer any questions.
Cool. Let's put this on here. Harman.com. I'll stick it on here so people can see it. And Joe, what's the next step for you?
So same from my side. You can send me an email, joe.iacobelli@cerence.com. You can also hit our website at cerence.com or follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. We'd love for you guys to follow us. Just search for Cerence and it should come up.
Perfect. I'll stick those links in the show notes so everybody can do just that. Thank you both for joining us. It's been absolutely amazing. We've had people who, usually when you do a live broadcast like this, people join and then inevitably over time it kind of dwindles ever so slightly. But I think we've lost about 3 people, I think, in the whole broadcast. So you've definitely held people's attention. You've certainly held my attention. It's been absolutely amazing. I really, really appreciate your time. And thank you everyone for tuning in. If you're not yet subscribed to VUX World, please do so. It is vux.world/subscribe. We do podcasts like this every single week, at least once a week, with experts like Albert and Joe, giving you their perspectives on the voice and conversational automation space. And we also do industry analysis and publish a hell of a lot of that kind of stuff as well on our website. So if you subscribe, you'll get all the invites, you'll get all the articles, you'll get all of that knowledge and insights to help you create successful AI strategies every single week. So please do that. Thank you all for joining me. Thank you again, Joe and Albert. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having us.